Everyone, welcome back to my channel, Crocheter's Creed, and today we are going to make sands from Undertale. And the materials that you will need are a 5mm hook for his head and his torso, a 4.5mm hook for his eyes, his arms, and his legs, and his hoodie and his pants. You will also need a 3mm hook for his pupils. I know you can't really see that, but a 3mm hook for his pupils. Excuse me. Now, this is really important. You will either need a sewing needle or a glue gun. Now, because I didn't know how to make a hoodie out of crochet, I had to separately sew on all the parts of his body. So instead of making a tiny little pair of pants, I had to make a tiny little stitch to wrap around his legs. So each part of his pants and his jacket are all individually made. So a sewing needle, you're going to have to, if you want to use your sewing needle, you're going to be sewing in a lot of things, a lot of ends, a lot of pieces onto his body. So if you want to do the sewing needle, then you can use it. Now, there's some parts for his body that you'll have to use the sewing needle because the glue gun might make it a bit messy and you want it to stay on. So for it, you can use the glue gun and the sewing needle. I recommend using both of them for this pattern, and I'll tell you which ones you need to use if you want to use them in whatever areas. Now, you will also need a glue, because I run out of glue really quickly with mine. Now for mine, since I run out of black yarn, I'm going to be using my dark blue yarn. And you can't really tell because the only dark part is his pants, and I'm going to make his pants dark blue. But you can use black for his pants. And his eyeballs are also black. But I'm going to try to see if I can find a bit of black for me to use. And then white. White yarn for his head. His entire body is white. And his pupils. You will need blue yarn for his jacket. And gray yarn. I don't have a lot of gray yarn. But gray yarn for the trimming of his jacket. And a little bit of black yarn. This looks so pitiful. I have no more black yarn. But a bit of black yarn. See, stuff is wrapped up in it. A bit of black yarn for his nose and his eyes. Or his pants, depending on what you want to make. You will also need, where are my yarn scissors? Oops. Yarn scissors and a stitch marker. And you will also need, I don't want to put this in the camera, but you will also need pillow stuffing. So, let's get started. Alright, now you're going to take your white yarn. I love magic circles, as you can probably tell. But you will take your white yarn and you will make a magic circle. You're going to take the yarn end, hold that in your hand. You're going to wrap this around and let that hang at the bottom, so it's a tiny little circle and a line in between it. You are going to take your 5mm hook, go into the stitch, pull out that piece of yarn, and you're going to chain 1. And for this part, you are going to put 12 single crochet into the magic circle. So, this is 1, this is 2, 3, 4. I think the background makes it a lot better to see. 5. It's more clear than my other dark ones. 6, 7, 8, 9. Come on. 10, 11. Come on. 11 and 12. Come on. Now what you're going to do, like you've done, is pull that piece of yarn there, pull it until it tightens, and that's what it's going to look like. You're going to slip stitch into the top stitch. You can't see because it's a bit lighter. Slip stitch into the top stitch, go into both stitches. Going to slip stitch there. And that's what it's going to look like. Let me hold it back a bit. Now, for row 1, you are going to chain 1, and you are going to single crochet into the first stitch. So not the stitch on the hook, go into the next stitch beside it. Now go in, and you are going to do 1 single crochet, yarn over, wrap around 1, yarn over, wrap around 2. And in the next stitch you are going to do an increase, which is also 2 single crochet. So yarn over, do a single crochet, go into the same exact stitch and do the same exact thing. Yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2. In the next stitch, you are going to do 1 single crochet, and in the next stitch after that, you are going to do an increase. And that is your pattern for row 1. Alright, now when you get back to the end, you are going to slip stitch into the top stitch there, slip stitch into the top stitch, yarn over, pull through. Now you're going to chain 1. Now this is where you're going to start adding your stitch marker. Now if you don't want to, you don't have to, but since my ends always tend to go sideways, and in this it might do the same thing, I'm going to put my stitch marker into that stitch, this one right here. I don't know if you can see it. This tiny stitch, the stitch under my chain 1, and I'm going to put it, my stitch marker, into that stitch, so it makes it easier for me to tell when I get back around, because with single crochet you can't really tell what's your chain 1 and what's not. So there's my stitch marker there. This is the next stitch. And for row 2, you are going to single crochet in every stitch around. Alright, now after you're done, this is what it's going to look like. You see my stitch marker here. I'm going to go into the stitch above the stitch marker and slip stitch. And that is row 2. I'm going to chain 1, and I'm going to take my stitch marker out and put it under that stitch. I don't know if you can see it. That stitch. I don't know if you can see it. You're able to see it. The stitch right underneath it. You're going to put in your yarn, your stitch marker, the stitch right there underneath it. Pull that back. And for row 3, you are going to single crochet into the next 2 stitches. So go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 1, pull through 2. In the next stitch, you're going to do a single crochet as well. And in the next stitch, you are going to do an increase. So that's 1 single crochet, go into the same stitch and do another single crochet. And in the next 2 stitches, you are going to do 1 single crochet. And in the next stitch, you are going to do an increase. And that is your pattern for row 3. So, 2 single crochet in the next 2 stitches. In the next stitch after the 2 single crochet, an increase. And you're going to repeat that all the way around until you get back to your stitch marker. Alright, now after you get back to the beginning, you're going to go into the stitch above the stitch marker. I don't know if you can see the stitch above the stitch marker, and you're going to slip stitch into that stitch. And that is round 3. Now for round 4, you're going to chain 1, move your stitch marker, put it under that stitch there, right there, put it under your chain 1. No, that's wrong. It's not the same stitch. Put it under your chain 1. Come on. There we go. Under your chain 1, and you are going to single crochet in every stitch around for row 4. Alright, now after you are done, you are going to slip stitch again into the top stitch above the yarn needle. Oh, don't go with the yarn, don't take the yarn needle with you. And do a slip stitch. You're going to chain 1, take out your yarn needle, and put it under the stitch you just did. So this one, that one right there, under it. Go into it, add your yarn, your stitch marker. I don't know why I keep saying yarn marker. Your stitch marker. And for row 5, you are going chain 1, and you are going to single crochet into the next 3 stitches. So go into the next stitch there, this stitch, do a single crochet. That's 1 single crochet, go into the next stitch. That's 2 single crochet, go into the next stitch. That is 3 single crochet. And in the next stitch after the 3 single crochet, you are going to do an increase. That's 1 single crochet, go into the same stitch, and that's 2 single crochet. The next 3, you are going to do 1 single crochet. That's 1, next stitch, that's 2, next stitch, that's 3, and in the next stitch after that, you are going to do an increase. Go into the same stitch, and that is your pattern for row 5. Alright, now after you are done, you're going to slip stitch into the stitch above the stitch marker, or in the top stitch, whichever one you want to call it. This is how it's going to start to form into. You are going to chain 1. This is one of the first times I ever used my stitch marker, because I didn't really use them, which is probably why my ends never lined up together. Hopefully it starts to line up and it actually works. You're going to add your stitch marker. Oops, come on. Under the stitch, the stitch underneath it, that stitch right there. Go into it, attach your stitch marker, and for row 6, you're going to single crochet. I don't want you to get confused with the stitch next to it. You go into that stitch, it's just the stitch markers really close to it, and it may look like you're into that stitch, but no, you go into the next. I'll just show you. Go into the next stitch, Yeah, it's going to line up, as you can see. It lines up. But you are going to single crochet in every stitch around for row 6. Alright, now after you are done, you are going to single crochet, slip stitch, to the top stitch or the stitch above your, the stitch above your yarn needle. What's going on? Oh, it's stuck on this tiny little, there we are. Slip stitch into the top stitch, and you are going to chain 1, take out your stitch marker. As you see, it's going to start to form into a tiny circle. This is sands. This is starting to become sand. Now you're going to add your stitch marker into the stitch underneath the chain 1. Hope this works out, because I've never really used the stitch markers. But after you do that, for row 7, you are going to single crochet into the next, 4 stitches. So go into the next stitch, this stitch right here, this stitch. Go into that stitch, do a single crochet, go into the next stitch, do a single crochet, that's 2 single crochet. Go into the 3rd stitch, that's 3 single crochet, and then to the 4th stitch, and that's 4 single crochet. Now you're going to go into the next stitch after that and do an increase. So go into the same exact stitch and do another single crochet. In the next 4 stitches again, you are going to do a single crochet. So that's 1, go into the next stitch. That's 2, go into the next stitch. I want to help you see it a bit better. That's 3, go into the next stitch. That's 4, and the next stitch after that you're going to do an increase. So go into the same exact stitch and do another single crochet, and you're going to repeat that pattern all the way around. Alright, after you are done, you're going to slip stitch into the top stitch or the stitch over top of the yarn, the stitch marker, and you are going to chain 1, and you're going to take your stitch marker out and put it under the stitch, that stitch there, under your chain 1. Come on. Under your chain 1. And for rows 8 through 15, you are going to single crochet in every stitch around. So for rows 8 through 15, single crochet in every stitch around. And I'll meet you back when you're done. Alright, now after you are done, this is what it's going to start to look like. And the stitch marker did pay off. I'm really, really happy, because it's straight down, so that makes me happy. But this is what it's going to look like. And don't worry about the thing. Once you stuff it, it's going to take shape. But for row 16, you're going to add your stitch marker to the stitch beneath it, and you are going to decrease twice in the beginning and the end of the round. So right now, I'm going to go into the next stitch, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, pull up a loop, wrap around, pull through 3. That's 1 decrease. Go into the next stitch here, next stitch here, yarn over, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through all 3. Now that's 2 decreases at the beginning. Now what you're going to do is single crochet and every stitch around until you get back to the last 4 stitches, because a decrease takes up 2 stitches, but since you're doing 2 decreases, you're going to leave 4 stitches available at the end. So single crochet around until the last 4, and I'll meet you back to do the 2 decreases. Alright, now after you are done, slip stitch into the top stitch, or the stitch over top of your stitch marker. Hold it so you can see what I'm doing. Chain 1, take out your stitch marker, go into the stitch underneath it, that stitch there, and row 17 you are going to decrease 3 times in the beginning and the end of the row. So, I'm going to go into the next stitch, this stitch here, yarn over, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull up a loop. That's 1 decrease, you're going to have to do 3. Let's go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through 3. That's your second decrease. Go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, and pull through all 3. And those are your 3 decreases. Now you're going to single crochet all the way around until you get back to the beginning, and you're going to leave 6 stitches open, 6 stitches open in the last few stitches, so that you can put your decreases, because a decrease takes 2, and since you are doing 3, you're going to need 6 stitches open at the end. So single crochet around until you get to your last 6 stitches, and I'll show you how to finish it. So do that, and I'll meet you when you come back. Okay, now after you've gotten back to your 6 stitches, you're going to go in to the next stitch and do a decrease, so pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop. You're going to yarn over it and pull through 3. That's your first decrease. Go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through all 3. That's your second decrease. I'm going to go in, yarn over, pull through that. That was 3, wasn't it? Wait. And when you've gotten back to the ending, you're going to go into the next stitch, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, pull up a loop, pull through 3. That's your first decrease. Go into the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over. That's 2 yarns on your 2 strands on your hook. Go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through another, pull through all 3. That's your second decrease. Gonna yarn over, pull through 1, go into the next tiny little stitch there, yarn over. You have 3, yarn over, pull through 3. You're going to slip stitch into the stitch. Come on now. Always has that tiny little thing on it. Tiny little strand. Slip stitch to the top stitch, or the stitch over top of the yarn needle. And that is row 17. Now for row 18, before I tell you, let me get my stitch marker. Put it in the stitch that is right directly under the chain 1. There, you can see it. And for row 18, you are simply going to decrease in every stitch around. And since decreases don't take that long to do, I'm just going to show you. So I'm going to go into the next stitch, not the stitch with the thing. Go into the next stitch, yarn over, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 3. Don't go into that stitch, go into the next stitch after that. So go into this stitch, yarn over, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 3. Don't go into that stitch. Don't mistake the last stitch you went into as your next stitch. Go into the next stitch here, yarn over, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 3. Go into the next stitch here, yarn over, go into the next stitch there, yarn over, pull through 3. Next stitch here, go in, yarn over, this stitch here, go in, yarn over, pull through 3. Next stitch there, go in, yarn over, next stitch, go in, yarn over, pull through 3. Next stitch here, go in, yarn over, go in, yarn over, pull through 3. Next stitch, yarn over. And after this, you will need your sewing needle for this part. So we're almost there. Go in, yarn over, pull through 3, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 3, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 3. Almost there. Don't go into that stitch. Go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 3, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 3, go into the next stitch there, yarn over, pull through, yarn over, pull through 3. We're getting back to the beginning. Next stitch there, yarn over, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 3. Go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull through 3. And in that very last stitch, you can just do one single crochet. And then after that, go into the stitch with the stitch marker and do a slip stitch. Now, after that is done, you're going to chain 1, and what you're going to do is start to add your stuffing. I'm going to pull this a little bit out with my yarn so that I won't stuff it into the pocket. I'm going to get my yarn stuffing. Excuse me for that. I'm going to get my yarn stuffing, and you're going to stuff it how much you like it. Sans has a pretty round head. So I'm going to take my stuffing, piece at a time, and start to stuff it a bit. Let me sit it up so you can see me stuffing it. Get a better angle. And make sure when you stuff it to make it, to push it in, because when I stuff mine, for some reason, some parts aren't stuffed as much, and then you get the way that looks, how it's pushed in. Make sure it's tightly stuffed, so push it down around the outside of it to give it a circular shape, and stuff it as tightly as you want. I'll show you on camera. Just keep stuffing as tightly as you want it, and see how that part's kind of flat. Put yarn in there, that part, stuff it around in that part there. Add yarn here. Sorry, I have a big thing of yarn and I didn't want to set it on the table so that it was in the camera. That may be a bit too big. Let's see. Yeah, that may be enough for mine. I'm going to add a little bit more because I don't want his head to be extremely huge. I mean, it is a type of plushie, so you, I guess a plushie, it would look cuter if the head was a bit bigger, but I think this is a little bit too big right now. I think that's a good size there. Wait, let me see. This is right. Yeah, it's a good enough size, I think. Alright, now, after you've stuffed your head, what you were going to do is you were going to leave, don't worry if that stuffing, once you sew it around, it'll be fine. You were going to take a very long tail, a really long tail. I take really long tails because I don't know if I'm going to run out of yarn, and it's better to have more yarn than a little yarn. So I'm going to add my yarn to my needle. No, wait, no. Don't add your yarn to your needle. My needle is still attached, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull this through and pull my yarn through the chain 1. And I'm going to tighten it, and make sure you take out your stitch marker. You don't want to leave that in there. Take out my stitch marker, pull that closed, and now I'm going to take my yarn needle and I'm going to add it to my hook. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your Sand's head, you're going to take his head, and you're simply going to go in and out through the stitches. Now, since the decreases are bigger stitches, it's going to be easier for you to go into the stitches. So I'm going to show you. You're going to go into the stitch, and go back out in the next stitch. Pull that up, pull that through. Since it's a long tail, it's going to take a bit longer. Let's see. And don't mistake of going into the same stitch. This is in that stitch, so you're going to go into this stitch, go into it, and go into the next stitch, and go back out of it. And you pull your yarn through. So that's in that stitch. You're going to go into the next stitch, go in through the stitch, and go out through the next one. And you're going to sew around the entire thing until you get back to the very beginning. So go into the next stitch, go into the next stitch with your needle, go into the next stitch, and you're still going into the next stitch after that, but you're going into this one and you're going back out through the next one so that you can sew it in a bit better. And you're going to repeat this. So you're going to sew around until you get back to the end. Okay, I'm in my last stitch, and I'm going to go into, make sure you can see it, I'm going to go into this stitch here with my needle, go into it, and pull through with my yarn. And after you're done, you're going to push your yarn in, make sure it's there, and just pull through it. Now it's going to look a bit scrunchy, But once you pull it out, because I didn't stuff mine enough, but once you pull it out, pull it all together, you're just going to single crochet around this, so make sure you pull it tightly, and just single crochet, not single crochet, stitch around the perimeter of the hole to make it pull in tighter, because you don't want your head coming undone. And make sure you pull it tight so that it closes. And just go around, well, you can't see it like that. Just go around the head. I should have stuffed it a bit more, that's why it's a bit crinkly. But make sure you pull through and stitch around it until you're comfortable that it won't come undone. And you won't see the bottom part of this, but that is Sand's little head. And I'm gonna leave my needle in, I'm gonna leave this yarn attached to the needle and attached to the head, because once I add on the body or the torso, I can just sew in the head to the torso without having to join my thing. So I'm going to set that to the side, and now we are going to make his torso. Now for his torso, you will still need your white yarn. Let me pull out some more so that I won't keep getting stuck. Sorry, you can see the shadow. It won't get stuck. And for the torso, let me get my pattern ready. For the torso, you will still be using your 5mm hook. Your 5.5, yeah, your 5mm hook. And again, you will be making a magic circle. So, magic circle there. All up. Chain 1, and you are going to do 14 single crochet into your magic circle. So, I'm going to do this quickly. I don't know why, my videos take so long. I feel like I'm not talking as much. They always end up being too long, and I think it's because I talk too much. So I'm going to try to just, I'm still going to explain it. I feel like I just talk too much. And you don't want to hear that, you just want to hear the pattern. So we're at 10, 11, 12, 13, and 14. And if you get confused, I will have the pattern in the description so that if you're confused about something that I've done, that you can go back and look. So you won't have to keep go back into the video and look for what I've done. So that's what it's going to look like. You're going to slip stitch into the top stitch, slip stitch into the top stitch there. You're going to chain 1, and again, you are going to be using your stitch marker to make it easier for your things to line up. Go into the stitch underneath the chain 1, go into the stitch, put your yarn stitch marker in, I don't know why I keep saying yarn, stitch marker in, and you are going to do 1 single crochet in the next stitch. So go in 1 single crochet, and you are going to do an increase in the next stitch. It's a bit similar to the head part. Two single crochet in the next stitch or increase. And you're going to go into the next stitch and do 1 single crochet. And you're going to go into the next stitch and do 2 single crochet in the same stitch or an increase. And that is your pattern for this part. So do that all the way around. After you get back to the end, you are going to slip stitch in the stitch above the stitch marker, chain 1, going to take your stitch marker out and put it under the chain 1, and for row 2 you are going to do a decrease in the first stitch, and then you're going to single crochet in every stitch around. Alright, now after you are done, you're going to slip stitch excuse me, into the top stitch here. Come on, it's always that stitch, or the stitch above your stitch marker. And you're going to chain 1. You're going to take your stitch marker out and put it in the stitch underneath your chain 1. In rows 3 through 5, you are going to single crochet in every stitch around. But don't forget to chain 1 and add your stitch marker underneath the chain 1 every time so that it'll line up. But 3 through 5, single crochet in every stitch around. Alright, now after you're done, you're going to slip stitch in the stitch above the yarn, the stitch marker. I don't know why I keep saying that. You're going to chain 1, and you're going to add your stitch marker underneath the chain 1. So add it underneath it and just push it out of the way. Excuse me. And for row 6, you are going to decrease in the first stitch. So go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, yarn over, pull up a loop, pull through 3. That is your decrease. Now after that, you're going to single crochet in every stitch around until you come back to the beginning. And that will be for round or row 6. Now once you get back to the beginning, you are going to go into stitch above the stitch marker, slip stitch, chain 1, take your stitch marker out and put it underneath, whoops, where'd it go? Put it underneath your chain 1, that stitch right there next to the stitch marker. Put it in rows 7 through 10. We go into the next stitch so you'll know. Rows 7 through 10, you are going to single crochet in every stitch around. Alright, now after you are done, you're going to slip stitch into the top stitch, chain 1, add your stitch marker, and for row 11, you are going to decrease twice in the beginning of your row. That's 1 decrease, go into the next 2 stitches and do your second decrease. And then you're going to single crochet around the entire row. And I'll meet you back when you're done. Alright, now after you're done, you're going to slip stitch at your stitch marker under your chain 1, and you are going to do a decrease in every stitch around for row 12. So go into the next stitch, pull up a loop, go into the next stitch, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 3, and don't mistake that stitch for your next stitch. Don't go into this stitch, go into the next stitch after it. So go in, yarn over, go in, yarn over, pull through 3, and that's your decrease. You're going to do a decrease all the way around for row 12. After you are done, you're going to slip stitch into the stitch. Make sure you can see this. Slip stitch in the stitch with the stitch marker. Chain 1. Put your stitch marker in. And for row 13, what you're going to do is you're just going to, single crochet in every stitch around. And after that, we're going to add our pillow stuffing. And that will be the torso. So single crochet in every stitch around for row 13, and then I'll come back and show you how to stuff it. Now after you are done and you've slip stitched into the stitch, you're going to chain 1 and take out your stitch marker. Take out your stitch marker, and you're going to begin to stuff your torso. I'm going to pull this out a bit so that it won't stuff into my torso. So you're just going to stuff your torso however tightly or loosely you want it to be. And then after that, you are going to, just as you've sewn your head in, you are going to sew around your torso in the exact same way you did your head. Make sure it's stuffed tightly. Oh, that doesn't look right. Let's see if we can shape it. Yes, that's good. I'll take a little bit more. Feel like it's a bit too stuffed here. Let's see. Make sure. Yeah, a bit stuffed, and let's see what that'll look like. Yeah. Alright, now I'm going to take my yarn, as I've done before, take my yarn, keep that there, and get a tail, rather long tail, where are my scissors? Rather long tail, snip it, pull your yarn through. After you pull your yarn through, you are going to attach your yarn needle. Where's my yarn needle? Attach your yarn needle and go in and out of the stitches So you're gonna have to, my yarn needle is still attached to the yarn on my head. So I'm gonna cut that off, cut that little piece off there. Put that yarn over there. Cut that piece off because it's a bit frayed. Add my yarn to my needle. Tie it. And as you did the head, you are just going to go in. Make sure you go in and out of the stitches. So you go into one, you go into one stitch and back out through the next. And you're going to do that around the entire thing. And when you're done, pull all the way through and it should tighten. And I'll meet you back when you're done. Now once you are done and you've pulled it tightly, just stitch around that tiny circle which you've pulled tightly around it, so that it will so that it's no chance that it's going to come undone when you sew it on. I'm going to pull it out a bit. And this is his torso. Now I'm going to leave my yarn attached to it, but I'm going to cut off my yarn for the needle so that I'll have it when I need it. And that is your torso. You can sit it on your head to see what it'll look like. And that's what it'll kind of look like when you're done. Hold out a bit. So that is your head and your torso. Now we are going to make the arms and the legs.